My name is Sim Kern. My pronouns are they, them. I'm an author and a booktuber, and I read 10 books in March, which is incredible for me. I've never read 10 books before. So this whole doing booktube regularly thing is really helping me read more than I ever have, which feels amazing. I feel very enriched by it. I was not doing well in like a mentally healthy place a month ago when I made this TBR, and I was looking for books that would kind of help pull me out of it, and I had asked for recommendations on Twitter. Surprisingly, the book that like really cheered me up was not one of the ones that people recommended, but I'll talk about that when I get to it. I am actually doing better. I feel more okay. There's still a lot of really terrible shit going on in the world everywhere you look, but I'm like, maybe because it's spring, I'm just feeling a little bit less in a dark place. So with that, let's get into the books. All right, the first book I read all the way through was Winter in Sokcho, which was the group read for Koreadathon. I started actually crying in H Mart before this, but something happened with that. I'll get to that when I talk about crying in H Mart. I enjoyed Winter in Sokcho. Like, it was just kind of an easy, sleepy, you're in this quiet winter town, resort town in Korea, and there's not a lot of people there, and it's very slow paced. And so it was enjoyable to read for those reasons. The main character, she was in her early 20s, and she works at a like boarding house in this sleepy resort town. And this much older French gentleman comes and stays at the house, and she becomes like obsessed with him. And he's a little bit obsessed with her, like he's maybe drawing her. And she also has a French dad. So she's half Korean, half French, but she's like never met her dad. So it's like, is this her father? Let's hope not, because her fantasies of him seem very sexual. Maybe there's some Oedipal stuff going on, or Electra complex stuff there going on. I'm not sure. I found the relationship very cringy. I'm not sure though if the author meant it to be cringy. Like, I can appreciate it because like when I was that age in my early 20s, there were a couple times that I did have like really cringy crushes. And this book kind of reminded me of that. And so it seems very realistic in that way, but I don't know if the author meant for you to like be bought into this relationship. And maybe that's just an issue of like in translation where like I'm not quite able to suss out what the author's intent was. But all in all, it was like interesting. Read very easily, like blew through it in a day. So I would recommend Winter in Sokcho. The next book I read was the first book of Ukrainian literature that I had ever read, which is Sweet Darusya, A Tale of Two Villages by Maria Matios. I learned a lot about Carpathian Mountains. When I read a book about like another country, I always like to like look at it on Google Maps and find out where it is and look at pictures of the region. That was really helpful with this book, especially also it centers on a village of the Hutsul people, who are indigenous to the Carpathian Mountains, and they have very beautiful, unique clothing with lots of embroidery and like these fur trim collars. There's like a picture of them here, but it's great to look at those pictures like in full color. There's also footnotes in the book, which I really appreciated, with cultural notes, which helps with some of that like in translation stuff and not knowing the full cultural context. In one place, they actually like point you like, please listen to this YouTube video of this dance. Unfortunately, I went to that YouTube link and it has been taken down, but I was able to like hear the song that they were talking about from another YouTube video. And it was a beautiful, she's writing about like a wedding dance, like the wedding song that plays at Hutsul weddings. And it was some of the most beautiful music writing I've ever seen. So this book, Maria Matios is a very skilled writer. It's certainly coming through like in the translation. Kudos to the translators, Michael Naidan and Olha Titarenko, because I'm sure I butchered that. Because it was a really beautiful, like the prose. And I know that when you're reading something in translation, that's a combination of the author and the translator's hard work. It tells the story of a daughter and then eventually some of her older relatives. I don't want to spoil anything, but basically they're like a family of outsiders in this small provincial village. And every main character that you get in this story is I would say like queer in some way. And I mean queer in the not just like their sexuality is maybe not the same as everyone else's, but more like they are bucking the social norms of the community that they are in for one reason or another. Darusya, the first main character, is mute, but she developed mutism at an advanced age, and eventually in the book you find out what was the traumatic event that triggered her mutism. But because of the differences, and then there's Ivan, who has like a tongue tie, so he lisps and he travels around from town to town selling mouth harps instead of like farming like everyone else, which makes everyone like suspicious of him. So it's basically how people who have something unusual or choose to live life eccentrically or have a difference about them are treated really horribly by the other people in their small provincial village. Every bit of joy that they try to find in this life is like snatched away, either by their jealous and small-minded neighbors who gossiping about them. And at one point that gossip turns into like real violence. Like a woman is like tied up in the forest to be eaten by wolves because of the gossip about her. So like gossip is serious business in this book. And then also this series of invaders. So I didn't realize how many different countries colonized these people. So first it was the Romanians, the Soviets briefly kicked out the Romanians, and then the Germans came in, and then the Germans gave this village back to the Romanians, but then the Germans came back, and then the Soviets came back when they kicked out Hitler at the end of World War II, and then that was the worst time for them. But all of these, empire, you get the sense of this village, just, conquerors coming and going. And when you think about what's going on in Ukraine and people saying like, oh, the Ukrainian people, they know war. You're seeing like civilians knowing how to deal with like landmines on the side of the road. This is a country that's experienced like, at least in this region, they had experienced like 6 different colonizers in a period of maybe 50 years. In the last century. So I definitely learned a lot. I also found out, I was just like mentioning that I was reading this to my dad, and I was like, oh, my dad was like, oh, the Carpathians. Yeah, our people are kind of from the Carpathians. I was like, what? I've never heard this. I always heard we were from like Vilna or we were Russian Jews. He's like, oh, well, Nana said Russian Jews because it was like the Soviet Union at the time, but actually she was from Kiev. So I didn't know that. My Nana's people were from Kiev, and my Papa's people were from somewhere on the Polish side at the base of the Carpathian Mountains. Actually, this village straddles the border in the Carpathians between Poland and Ukraine. And there's some interesting stuff about, the river and the mirror image of the village on the two sides. And my dad said that he had a relative once tell him they would go on vacation by walking into the Carpathian Mountains. Like they would take a vacation, but they didn't have a car. And obviously they were like poor Jewish people. And I guess there was no like train or anything to take. They would just like get some gear and walk up into the mountains and take their vacation up there. And my dad just like remember that from his childhood because it was like he couldn't imagine like walking to a vacation. So then learning about that, it really made me curious about what is the story of like the Jewish people in this book. There are mentions of like the Jewish people living inside the Hutzul community. They run the taverns in town, and you meet some of the Jewish characters running the tavern. And then Matthias just mentions that like when the Germans left the final time, after they left, all of the Jewish taverns were smoldering ruins. They've been burned to the ground. But she doesn't tell you what happened to the Jews. Maybe the people, the characters that we had met. So I kind of wanted to know. That was a big question for me. Maybe it's like so obvious because that history is very familiar in Ukraine that she felt like the image of the ruins was enough to be like, oh yeah, none of them made it. Like they were all murdered. I don't need to even say it. I don't know. Maybe they left. I don't know what happened to the Jews in this book. But it seemed like they were getting along fine with the Hutzul people until all these invaders came along, from the way Matthias paints it. That, I don't know if that's true, because I know all our people left that region long before Hitler came to power because they were experiencing pogroms and things. It was not a great place for Jews at the time. So the theme seems to be like any happiness or joy that you find in this life will ultimately be snatched away from you by violence and tragedy and sorrow and death. This one didn't cheer me up, but it was like, felt very real, and I did find a lot of the writing very beautiful. Trigger warning for a ton of violence, and also there's a really shocking colloquial phrase using a slur against Roma people, which was not cool. I told y'all I really wanted to read a book by a trans woman in my TBR, and two of y'all recommended Fierce Femmes and Notorious Liars, a dangerous trans girl's confabulous memoir by Kai Chang Tom. And I'm so glad I picked this one because it was amazing. Oh my God. It's like this electric charged fairy tale of a memoir. So for example, like I feel like the author is describing Seattle when she talks about a place where the sky is always gray and it always rains, and it's called the gloom. And then this is in her childhood was spent in the gloom, and the walls of her house are like breathing and suffocating them. And one day 40 mermaids decided to throw themselves on the beach and die, you know? So I feel like that's a story about like a kid growing up in Seattle. There was like a mass pod of whales who died, which was a very traumatic event. But by turning it into this like fairy tale, I don't know, it makes the narrative like really come alive. And so basically this trans girl, like 18 or 19, I think, when she leaves home, goes to another big city, the city of smoke and lights, I think, which is maybe New York or maybe LA, I'm not sure. She ends up like connecting with a bunch of other trans women. But due to the violence that, you know, trans women being killed in their city, they form a girl gang and fight back. I read it in like a day and a half, 2 days. I couldn't put it down. It's empowering and fiery and so creative. Like from an author perspective, it just makes my like neurons start firing. And I just love reading something that feels completely original. The voice just grabs you and like drags you in. And this is a great pick to put on your list for June. If you want to read a bunch of queer books in June, I would definitely recommend adding that one to your list if you have not already. 5 stars. So a quick little graphic novel. I said I've been trying to read kid lit that's been banned books. One book that was banned near us in Katy is The Breakaways. By Kathy G. Johnson. This was a really cute memoir about a girls' soccer team. They're like the D string team in their school, you know, they're not good. They don't win ever or score points ever. At the beginning of the book, like all the teens are also kind of awful to each other, like just really snarky and rude to each other all the time in a way that's very realistic and like how teens often act. But they kind of come together as like a friend group more than a soccer team. It does something with the trope of like the sports team narrative that I don't want to spoil. Some of the characters are queer and come out to each other, and there's one scene where two of the girls are a girl and someone who comes out as a trans guy are having a sleepover, and they are lying in bed and they come out to each other and then they kiss. They have a little kiss, like a chaste little kiss, but it's in bed. That's why they banned it in Katy. Can you fucking believe it? I just think it's completely sweet and adorable. Actually, I was like, my daughter like wanted to know what I was reading, and she came and like read it over my shoulder, and I was reading her. Oh yeah, also there's like the protagonist like imagines herself inside a fairy tale all the time, which I feel like is very realistic for 6th graders, like a fairy tale that relates to her life. I was definitely doing that when I was in 6th grade. And it was just like so sweet. And my daughter was over my shoulder and wanted me to read the words to her, and did that for probably like, I don't know, like a good third of the book. And there was absolutely nothing in it that I felt was like inappropriate for a 4-year-old, much less middle schoolers. So get it together. Okay, one of the books that was recommended to me for like improving my mental health when feeling feelings of global despair was Pleasure Activism by Adrienne Maree Brown. So this book is about pleasure. It's about being an activist. Sometimes, and it's very specifically, Adrienne Maree Brown is a Black queer woman, and she's writing this book for other Black queer women. So it often felt like, you know, this isn't really applicable to me. It also felt kind of not applicable to me, mostly because Adrienne Maree Brown is single and she's not single, but she has many partners. She's polyamorous. She's not married, and she doesn't have kids, and she doesn't ever want kids. And my life is like so full of kids. So she's sort of giving you advice on like how to be an activist and do self-care, and how embracing pleasure is often a radical act in our society, particularly for Black queer women. But all of us, you know, self-care, like we should embrace pleasure. We should reject like puritanical notions that like pleasure is somehow inherently wrong, which is something that I struggle with. I definitely have some like puritanical programming. Everything she said I thought was just like brilliant. She writes with so much nuance. about every topic she takes on. Every time I'm like, wait, but what about, she's considered it, and give her a second and she's going to get to that point. There's like a ton of short little chapters in this book. So there's interviews. Lots of them are like interviews with other activists and things that she knows. So it really feels like a community project. A lot of it is about sex and drugs. And those are two things that are like not really a part of my life much anymore. No, not that I don't have sex, but like, I don't want to talk about this. Topics range from like, she's talking about, you know, sex work, polyamory, different drug use, like marijuana, hallucinogens, things like nipple play. Like there's like a ton of focus on sex and substances as ways of giving you like pleasure and joy in your life. It would have fit my life a lot better in my 20s or like before I had kids. She gives you hot and heavy homework in chapters, which are like, you know, have sex in this way that you've never tried, or try this drug. And like, as a parent who's like barely keeping my head above water, like it almost gives me FOMO, or it feels like homework that I really don't like teach. When am I gonna have time to do that? You know what I mean? So it just felt not very applicable to my life in that way. And that's fine. I think it's like, this is probably a life-saving book for a lot of people. And it's gonna challenge a lot of your like inhibitions for a lot of people in a good and positive way. There's things that, you know, really aren't applicable in my life, but were still really interesting. Like, for example, there's one chapter, it was an interview with a marital abolitionist. Now, I am very happily married and monogamous person. Totally, polyamory is not for me. But it turns out from like reading this chapter, I'm a marital abolitionist too, because what this activism means by marital abolition is like anyone should be able to like configure a family however they want. And I totally agree with that. Like, you should be able to like share benefits, pool your money, you know, build a financial structure for your family, give hospital visiting rights to whoever you want and as many other consenting adults as you want. By that token, I found out I'm a marital abolitionist, even though I'm happily monogamously married. So that was interesting. But again, it wasn't really like the perfect book like for me at this moment in my life, but I really learned a lot from it and appreciated it. The next book that I read, also an audiobook, also a recommendation for like mental health, was Becky Chambers's A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. We started listening to this in the car because I had heard that like Becky Chambers was, I had it in my head that she was like so wholesome. Everyone who talks about her, like, she's so wholesome. And we were driving down to Brazos Bend, which is a swamp near us, me and my two daughters and my nephew. One daughter and my nephew are, they're 16 and 14. So we were all listening to the audiobook together. I was like, this will be fun. We'll like start listening to this. And everyone was really loving it for like 20 minutes. You know, we're on this spaceship. We're getting to know all these cool different aliens. And then it's like, oh, the lizards are really sexy and they like having sex with like everyone all the time in public. And then, but that was like just like a little mention. It's like, okay, we'll keep listening. And then the AI is like attracted to one of the engineer dudes and they want to like get a body for the AI so they can have sex. And that was when we turned it off. It was uncomfortable to listen to in a car with children, obviously. So I listened to the rest of it though on audiobook. There is a fair amount of interspecies coupling, which is cool. It's fine. It was a fun, enjoyable book. I think this one actually did work well as an audiobook because it does not have a very strong central plot. It's more like episodic. Each member of the crew gets like a chapter or two to give them like a little mini character arc, and so you kind of get to know each character in that way. The whole time they're on this long journey to a small angry planet. But when they get there, not much happens. I mean, it's like a little bit of plot happens, but it's definitely more episodic in nature. But I think that's cool. It's cool to have some like low stakes sci-fi. You don't see that a lot. I think that's why people really gravitate towards Becky Chambers. So I would recommend it, especially if you're looking for low stakes sci-fi. If you know you don't like low stakes, if you want something that has a strong central plot or a mystery to solve or a lot of tension, this is not that book. This is sort of a sleepy journey, and it's well titled in that way. It's A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. So the book that finally did like pull me out of a pretty bad depression was the nonfiction book that I read for research into AI, You Look Like a Thing and I Love You. This book made me laugh so hard. I can't believe it. I can't believe that like a nonfiction book about computer science was like the most entertaining thing I read this month because I was sort of dreading reading it. It was so funny. I recommend it so highly. Okay, so it's not going into like the future of AI or like androids or anything, because those we're pretty far away from those. This is talking about contemporary AI. Janelle Shane has been working with AI for a long time. She's definitely an expert. She gives hilarious examples what AIs can and can't do and how they try so hard to solve their little problems, and then they just make really silly mistakes, or they solve problems in a way that their coders did not anticipate with hilarious results. I was so glad I read this book also because I got a couple of plot points for my book figured out. Interesting ways to write about sabotaging AI. And in Rules for the Reckoning, you've got like at one point a relatively smaller group of young people who are like on the run from the full entire weight of the US military. And so having some convincing plot points of like how they could fool really sophisticated AI, like military AI, I got those ideas from reading this book, which is what I wanted, which is awesome. AI, I mean, in a way, they're like humans, like trying your best and failing spectacularly as a species or as a program. I mean, it happens. And I don't know, it put me in a really good mood reading this book. I don't know why. It just was exactly what I needed this month. It's funny how, you never know what book is going to be the book that does it for you. So I highly recommend 5 stars, all the stars that I have to give to You Look Like a Thing and I Love You. Let's talk about crying in H Mart. This was also a book that I needed to read, but I almost didn't finish it. I'm so glad I did. So I picked this up for Readathon. I didn't really know anything about it. I just knew that everyone had been talking about crying in H Mart. The title grabbed me right away. I mean, my family goes to H Mart every week. Husband is Korean American, and our kids are Korean. They make like our own kimchi once a week now. Like reconnecting with food through H Mart has been a huge like cultural thing for our family, because my husband was raised like very Americanized and not really taught anything about his Korean culture. And one of the ways he connected to his culture has been through learning to make its food, which has been like really important to him. And we actually used a YouTuber named Mangchi, and I have her recipe book, which we use like all the time to the point it's like falling apart, to learn to make Korean food. And Mangchi is in this book too. It's like so many of the experience of Michelle Zauner in this book are experiences, things that I have seen my husband and daughters go through, multiracial, Korean and white, with first generation immigrant parents. So I kind of knew from the title, like, I bet that book's gonna resonate with me, and it sure did. But what I didn't know is it's a memoir about Michelle Zauner's mother dying of cancer. I didn't really think about how that was gonna get to me, but I read like 2 or 3 chapters, kind of started freaking out. And the reason is, well, one, the relationship as a teenager, Michelle kind of goes back and talks about her relationship with her mom as a teenager, and it felt very similar to what my relationship was with my mother as a teenager. But unfortunately, where she and her mother were eventually able to like come together in adulthood, especially when Michelle left her life in Philadelphia to take care of her mom when she started dying of cancer, and they got this like resolution. My relationship with my mother has only gotten much worse in adulthood. It's still been like very rocky and turbulent, to the point that she, when I came out as trans, that was really something that she never was able to accept and said a lot of really horrible things about. And then she cut me off completely like a year ago. And I've tried to reach out since, and she does not interact. So, and she doesn't interact with my brother either. She's like totally, both her children. She's just like, she's chosen Fox News. So I realized reading this book that I have a deep, profound fear that my mom's gonna die, and I'm not gonna know, like, I'm not gonna ever talk to her again before she dies. And I'm not gonna get the kind of like closure or like anything that Michelle got in this book. If she were to die, I would get like a text from her boyfriend, I guess, maybe, to find out about it. Or I might just not find out about it, So I had to like stop reading for a while and like process those fears and then be like, do I want to finish this book? And then I did. And you know what? I really loved it. It was a beautiful memoir. It is about someone dying of cancer. So it's like, and that's not a spoiler. She tells you right from the beginning. So it's, you know, heavy, but it's very beautifully written. Like I said, I found so many like similarities between Michelle's experience, my kids' experience. I feel like hopefully that will help me like help them navigate it better. And then I found out Michelle Zauner is the lead singer of Japanese Breakfast, which is like a really great band that I've been listening to all week since reading this book. So you should check this out, and you should also check out Japanese Breakfast because they're incredibly cool. All right, I'm not going to talk much about Clean Air by Sarah Blake because you can hear everything I thought about it in the Climate Fiction Book Club discussion of it, which I will link to below, or maybe up there if I can figure out how to put them up there. And then the last thing I read this month was for my IRL book club, Gods of Jade and Shadow by Sylvia Moreno-Garcia. This is adult, but it feels like a YA. I feel like it could have been a YA. The main character is 18. I feel like it was one of those decisions where the publisher was like, should we make this YA or not? And because of the way the ending played out, I think they decided to make it adult. But fair warning, it feels very YA. If you love a tropey YA romance where the premise is like a poor sort of Cinderella figure put upon by her family and having to do all the chores, and like the unloved daughter in the family finding a skeleton that turns out to be the god of death, and then the god of death is super hot and naked when she meets him, and then they have to go on a quest together, and he's very prickly and godlike and unavailable at the beginning of his journey, but as the journey progresses, things start to heat up. If that sounds like your kind of book, then you will really enjoy this. I did. That is my kind of jam. I got bought into the romance and all the mysticism. I also loved like the setting and the styles. It's set in 1920s Mexico. Like I said, every time I read a book like set in another country, I'm always looking at pictures. Like, so I'm going on Google Images, like looking up where it travels all around different cities in Mexico and things. So I'm looking them up. I'm looking up pictures of those places, and doing that combined with Moreno-Garcia's really good descriptions. Like I felt like I had such a beautiful image of this book in my head, and the stylish like flapper women and the, you know, dudes with their cool hats and suits and everything. And visually it was like a beautiful novel and like a really fun adventure to go on. So I recommend this one also. I think this was great. Those are all the 10 books I read in March. I actually am probably, maybe there's still a day left in March, and I might finish Gun Island by Amitav Ghosh in that time, which would make 11 books for March. And we are going to be discussing that book on this channel on Saturday for the Climate Fiction Book Club live show. We're so excited this month because not only is Allie from Alexandria the Great joining us again, but also we have a new guest, which is Nat from A Natty Nook, whose channel is incredible and who is in Singapore. So we had to change the time because Singapore is on the other side of the world. And we have Will in Denmark, me in Houston, Sage on the west coast of the US, and Nat now in Singapore. So it was quite a challenge to find a time that was reasonable for all of us to get together. Will, bless their heart, is going to stay up till midnight to make the show, and Nat in Singapore is going to wake up at 6 a.m. So I'm just like blown away that these people want to talk about this book, this climate fiction book. We're passionate, man. We're passionate about climate fiction in this club. So it's going to be a good show that's going to happen on Saturday. The live show link is already up. If in Houston, we're doing it at 5 p.m. on Saturday, April 2nd. And you can put that in a time zone calculator and figure out what that means for where you are. And I hope you will join us. We always love getting audience comments and questions during the live stream. What else? Oh my gosh, you guys. The cover reveal for Real Sugar is Hard to Find is coming very soon. Like possibly, like probably next week. And it's going to be hosted by Tor.com, Tor, the publisher Tor. I'm just like so honored that they are going to host our cover reveal. My publisher reached out to them kind of like as a long shot because like why are they going to do a cover reveal for like a book they're not even publishing? And like, I'm kind of a small name, you know, I'm like not a big deal. But the editor wrote back and was like, oh my God, we love Sim. Of course we'll do it, which was so nice. Thank you. Like, oh my God. Yeah, they're going to host my cover reveal. The cover is beautiful. I cannot wait to show it to you. And so if you want to make sure you don't miss that, check out my Twitter next week. Once the date is finalized, I will tell you when it's going to be. And very soon, my cover, once it's revealed, you're going to be seeing the shit out of it because I'm going to be posting it all the time and sharing it all the time because it's beautiful and I want you to buy my book. That's it for me this month. I'll see you soon. I'll see you on Saturday maybe for the Climate and Fiction Book Club. I hope you join us. And that's all I got for today. Bye.